Hey there guys, I am the Six Machine and welcome back to another Warhammer video. Today we're going to be doing another short little unit overview and review, and this time we are taking a look at the friendliest, kindest, most generous Dark Angel character of all. Wait, no, that's not right. No. Today we're taking a look at Asmodai. Yes, that's right, the Master Interrogator-Chaplain and Master of Repentance of the Dark Angels. Notably, before we start, just a little bit of fluff, he isn't the Master of Sanctity, or as the Dark Angels call it, the Grand Master of Chaplains, as you might expect, given he is the only named chaplain the Dark Angels can take, which does actually affect some of his tabletop rules interactions, as we'll find out later on. But I just wanted to point that out, as a lot of people do think that he is. It's actually Saffon, who was a named character prevalent back in 2nd edition, I believe, but it has since sort of fallen out of the lore a bit, at least in terms of having a recognizable presence. Anyway, let's get started. As with the other videos, we'll be taking a look at his overall stat line, and then considering his offensive output and his defensive abilities before deciding if Asmodai is worth taking in your Dark Angels list. So, are we ready? Let the interrogation begin. Coming in at a not exactly cheap 130 points, Asmodai is still a firstborn non-Primaris Marine, so his stat line does reflect that, sporting movement 6, weapon skill 2+, ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness of 4, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9 and a 3-up save. Now this is exactly the same as a Dark Angels Interrogator-Chaplain, or funnily enough a regular Primaris Chaplain, so he isn't exactly losing out in comparison to them by not being a Primaris, but as a named character, if he was a Primaris and had crossed the Rubicon, he would, much like we saw with characters like Lazarus, most likely have an additional wound and attack. So if or when he does cross the Rubicon, I do expect that he will get that kind of improvement to his stat line. So it is a pretty standard set of stats for a chaplain, a good number of attacks, a lower ballistic skill, but then chaplains are really more about melee combat and buffing than they are about shooting, so that 3-up to hit with his bolt pistol probably won't even cross your mind most of the time. With 5 attacks on the charge, hitting on 2s, he is going to be pretty accurate and get a good few hits in against whatever you send him in against. So what kind of war gear is he bringing to help him take out the enemies of the Imperium? Well, as mentioned, he has his bolt pistol that you will likely forget about round about now. And then he has his melee weaponry. As a chaplain, he does of course come with his Crozius Arcanum, which is a strength +2, -1 AP, flat 2 damage weapon, giving him 5 strength 6, 2 damage attacks on the charge. It's not too shabby really, and definitely a great way to clear through squads of infantry. Unlike other chaplains, however, Asmodai also comes with a special trick up his sleeve: the Blades of Reason. Now these are described as a many-bladed knife which is crisscrossed with neural wire and mysterious arcane technology that amplifies pain beyond belief. So far, so grimdark, and whilst they are usually kept for torturing and getting confession out of the fallen, they are on his profile as a weapon which he can use in combat. The Blades of Reason, as you can see, give Asmodai 1 additional attack, and he can only make 1 attack with the blades, at a profile of strength +1, no AP, and they do an actually deceptively impressive 2d3 damage. Now at strength 5 with no AP, it is quite unlikely that you're going to get these through all that often. Even with Asmodai's 2+ to hit, you do have a less than 20% chance of getting a wound through on a toughness 4 3-up save profile. But for those times when you do and your opponent fails their 3-up or their 2-up save, it is genuinely priceless when you get to tell them it's now going to do 2d3 wounds. Normally they're expecting, something like a wound or 1 mortal wound in addition to 1 damage. But when they realize that you could absolutely one-shot their 6 wound HQ, it really, truly is hilarious. So please don't forget to do this if you ever bring Asmodai, because for every few games or so that it pays off, it will be so worth it and it will give you a very, very memorable moment. Asmodai also comes, of course, with a lot of the generic Space Marine rules, in particular the Angels of Death rule, bringing with it And They Shall Know No Fear, Bolter Discipline, Shock Assault, and Combat Doctrines. As with other HQ single character units, And They Shall Know No Fear and Bolter Discipline won't really affect him in the slightest, but Shock Assault and Combat Doctrines are actually very useful for him, giving him that extra attack that we've mentioned previously, and also in the Assault Doctrine, not only giving his Crozius -3 AP, but also, quite crucially, giving his Blades of Reason a -1 AP to just help that little bit more in getting that one attack through to the enemy. And in addition to that, unlike we saw with Lazarus, Asmodai does actually get benefit from the new Dark Angel's Sons of the Lion ability, as he does indeed come with the Deathwing keyword. What this means is that the implacable part of the Sons of the Lion rule will come into play, and as you can see on your screen now, it is really very good for Asmodai. When he's going up against enemy characters or models with more than 8 wounds, which quite often I think he will be if you bring him, he gets full rerolls to hit. Again, not only making his Crozius much scarier in melee combat, but giving you yet even more chance of getting that all-important one attack from the Blades of Reason through. And as a quick example, against that same toughness 4 3-up save profile that we used earlier, in the Assault Doctrine, you go from a roughly 20% chance to cause an unsaved wound to an almost 33% chance to wound. It's still, of course, by no means guaranteed, or even, you could argue, likely, but still, that is a whole 13% more of a chance to get that 2d3 damage through and really hurt or potentially kill an enemy HQ. As far as his defenses go, he does, as we saw, have 5 wounds and a 3-up save. He comes with his Rosarius, which gives him a very handy 4-up invulnerable save, and like all the other Dark Angel HQs, crucially he comes with the Inner Circle ability, which means he can never be wounded on less than a 4-up. This makes all of the Dark Angel characters so much more survivable than other chapters' equivalents, and especially when you have a character who wants to be getting into the thick of melee like Asmodai. Your opponent is going to be able to allocate attacks to him, so it is really going to make a big difference in keeping him alive against things like Thunderhammers or Power Fists, or even things like Power Swords. Now that they have that +1 strength, would be wounding him on 3s, but now they're pushing back to 4s. It's just really nice to know, in my opinion, that even after your enemy has made his hit roll, you essentially have a 50-50 chance to ignore it because of the Inner Circle rule, and then you have another 50-50 chance to ignore it with your 4-up invulnerable save if it gets past your armor save. It really is a good couple of layers of protection and really does make the Dark Angel characters, as I've said, much sturdier than you would imagine them to be. In terms of his other abilities, Asmodai does have some shared chaplain abilities. The Aura of Dread, giving enemy units within 6 inches a debuff, which means they count as being below half strength, is actually a Dark Angel's Interrogator-Chaplain ability, but it is one that all Interrogator-Chaplains have. It's one that's easily forgettable, but it is actually quite fantastic. Being able to charge into enemy squads, kill a few, and then see 1/3 of the survivors potentially running away instead of just a 6th can really impact the usefulness of that squad for the remainder of the battle. And in theory, Asmodai could make his points back just on this ability alone if you charge him into an expensive squad, kill a few, and then your enemy rolls some 2s on their, fails their morale, should I say, first, but then rolls a few 2s on their attrition tests. He also has a few more of the generic chaplain abilities. Spiritual Leaders, giving his leadership of 9 to friendly units within 6 inches, is useful and will help you potentially avoid a few morale tests here and there, although obviously as Dark Angels, morale isn't something that we are as concerned about as maybe other armies or chapters are, because we know that we can only ever lose one model from a squad in a morale phase. And in addition to that, obviously, as a chaplain, he comes with the newish rule, which is the litanies. Like other priest models, he knows the litany of hate, but unlike regular chaplains, he also knows an additional 2 from the litanies of battle instead of just 1. Unfortunately, he can still only chant 1, and it still does only go off on a 3+, much like regular chaplains, rather than a 2+, so he notably isn't better than a regular chaplain in that respect. And quite critically, as he is a named character, he cannot be given the Master of Sanctity chapter command ability. And what this means is that he not only misses out on the Master of Sanctity ability, which lets the priests not only know but also recite an additional litany in the command phase, but he also cannot choose to take the Wise Orator Warlord trait, which lets them successfully chant a litany on a 2+ instead of a 3+, and also allows them to use the Commanding Oratory stratagem, which is normally 2 command points, for 1 command point instead. It is genuinely a very, very big downside to Asmodai in that he misses out on this huge upgrade, because this is one of the things that makes chaplains go from being good to being exceptionally fantastic on the tabletop. And honestly, it is one of the biggest reasons why I think taking a standard chaplain or interrogator chaplain is going to be a much better idea than taking Asmodai, purely for the reliability in getting off those key litanies when you need to. Asmodai does have a slight buff to his litanies compared to regular chaplains in that he casts his Litany of Hate, which is essentially the old aura of reroll hits in melee. He does get a +1 to that cast, so he does succeed on a 2+, and he is allowed to add 3 inches to the range of it, meaning that he has a 9-inch aura of reroll hit rolls in melee, which he gives out to squads around him. It's not bad per se, and it's very fluffy and fitting with his description as just being an absolutely angry, mad, all the time chaplain, but it just isn't as good as the benefits you can obtain by bringing a chaplain and making them a Master of Sanctity. Even if you discount a Primaris chaplain or a chaplain on a bike, or taking an Interrogator chaplain with Terminator armor or a jump pack, just the generic bog standard Interrogator chaplain gives you the same profile, and yes, you miss out on the hilarious Blades of Reason, the third known litany, as well as the slightly buffed Litany of Hate, but you're a whole 45 points cheaper. So even if you made your unnamed Interrogator chaplain a Master of Sanctity, you're still cheaper than Asmodai by a full 20 points. And I would definitely say that overall, a Master of Sanctity Interrogator chaplain is actually much better than Asmodai. He can be 2+ to cast his litanies, he knows and can cast an extra one, and he is much, much more customizable in terms of how you can load him out. And I'm sure we have all seen and read about the Dark Angels Smash version of the chaplain that they can build that really does allow him to put a huge amount of damage out in the melee phase. And so with that in mind, he just ends up being not only a lot killier than Asmodai is, but he's also much, much better at providing those utility and those buffs to the rest of your army compared to Asmodai, and really he can do it much better than Asmodai ever could. I mean, yeah, it's one thing to have a 9-inch Litany of Hate, that's great and everything, but with the Interrogator Chaplain as a Master of Sanctity, you could do that, and then you could also do Canticle of Hate to get that charge distance off to actually make sure you get into combat, or, you know, Exhortation of Rage to give the unit an extra attack. I just think overall, being able to cast 2 litanies and have them go off on a 2+ is a much, much better set of abilities to have than Asmodai's slightly buffed Litany of Hate. Asmodai, if you take him as your warlord, which I can't imagine why you would, but if you did bring him and he was your warlord, he does have the Fury of the Lion warlord trait, which gives you a 6-inch aura of giving +1 strength to your allied units when you make a charge, or if you heroically intervene, or if you get charged, which isn't bad. Like, you know, he is meant to be in melee, so you want to charge him in with some melee units. Giving them +1 strength isn't a terrible thing. But again, with the Interrogator Chaplain, you can choose your warlord trait. So if Fury of the Lion is one that's going to benefit you, you can take that. If something like Calibanite Knight is going to be better, so you can make your chaplain better at hitting things, that's going to be better for you. You just have a lot more customizability. Customability. I don't know. Either way, you can build him exactly how you want, and that will almost always mean that you can create a better character than someone like Asmodai, who is very set in what he can and cannot do. And I'll be honest, it is a bit of a shame, because Asmodai is such a cool, grim, dark, iconic 40k character. Like, if anyone pictured what the grim darkness of 40k looked like, they would picture a chaplain, I think, and the most grim dark chaplain in my mind is Asmodai. So he is like the epitome of the grim dark look and feel of 40k, and I think that based on that and based on his fluff and his lore, he really should be a step above regular chaplains. I know he isn't a Master of Sanctity, and it would be stupid to just give him those rules simply because he's a named character, but I do think that they should maybe double down on him being incredibly killy in combat and buffing things that way. Perhaps they could make it so that he only knows Litany of Hate, but it is an auto cast for him. And I would also really like to see a change to the Blades of Reason. I know I've mentioned before how I love them and how hilarious they are, but honestly, they will very rarely actually do anything. I feel like it should, I don't know, be a separate attack where if it hits, it does D3 mortal wounds, and the model loses some leadership for the battle to show that it's kind of causing this unimaginable pain for them. Or if it's on an enemy squad, maybe they take D3 mortal wounds, but then they have to take an attrition test at the end of the phase, even if, they wouldn't normally have to because they didn't need to take a morale test. Just something that forced some kind of leadership, or something like the old school fear, where they had to test against it, or if they took a wound, and if they failed it, they had -1 to hit or something like that. Something to make it a bit more impactful in the game. Obviously, when it does wound and go through, it does 2d3 wounds, so it can potentially change a game if you get it on the right character and kill them off. But it's just so unlikely that it's going to happen. I would rather it had maybe a slightly less damaging stat line, but one that impacted enemy units and enemy squads more in terms of their psychology and their leadership. His lore and his fluff is written so well in terms of making him seem so fanatical and insane, and it's a really good representation of how I think he's meant to be in the chapter, but I just don't think they quite carry it across well enough to the tabletop, and especially for a full 130 points, I really don't think what he brings in terms of his damage output or his buffing abilities is worth it, especially not when you can get a better, more useful, and cheaper chaplain both in the Primaris and the Interrogator versions, which the Dark Angels have access to. So that is it for poor Asmodai. I do hope he gets a Primaris model at some point, or, and this is something I would actually be quite intrigued by, don't bite my head off, I'm not sure it will happen because I don't know how brave Games Workshop are, but what if Asmodai was the first named old school character that actually died crossing the Rubicon? We always complain that the named characters get grievously injured, then they cross the Rubicon, and it's got a really low chance of succeeding, but somehow the named characters always survive it. What if Asmodai died? Or what if he was just so against the idea of Primaris that he refused to cross the Rubicon and he just let himself die rather than come back as a Primaris? That would give Games Workshop the chance to kill off Asmodai and bring a new chaplain model in the form of Saffron, who would of course have the Master of Sanctity rule, as he's the Grandmaster of Chaplains. I actually wouldn't be opposed to that. I don't know, I kind of think that would almost be fitting for him and like a fitting end for him. And we know that Saffron is a character in the lore. He's got backstory. I believe he's even got a book written about him. So he's not a brand new, unknown character. They could quite easily bring him back to the forefront of the lore and replace Asmodai with him. And that would allow them to bring a chaplain model for the Dark Angels that could have the Master of Sanctity rules and would be a named character, so they could buff him to be slightly better in comparison to how Asmodai is at the moment. Anyway, I don't know what GW are going to do, whether they will consider that when they come around to trying to decide what they want to do to Asmodai. Who knows? I'm guessing we will probably find out in the next few years, but that's just an idea that I had throwing around in my head. It would be quite interesting. It would be a very brave move from GW, which is why I don't think they will, but I just think that Asmodai either has to get a pretty significant buff when he crosses the Rubicon, or just gets killed and Saffron comes to the forefront with his Master of Sanctity rules. I would love to hear your experiences with Asmodai on the tabletop. Do you think he's ever worth it, or is it just too much of a loss compared to taking a Master of Sanctity Primaris or Interrogator-Chaplain? And how would you change Asmodai to make him more viable and more worthwhile as an alternative to a Master of Sanctity? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoy these Warhammer videos. I love doing them, and having your support is such a huge help. I really do appreciate it. Please do leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more Warhammer content from me, as well as comment any other ideas or suggestions for videos or characters or units you would like to see me talk about. But until next time, I will catch you later, guys.